Okay, thanks, Steve, for the introduction. We're delighted to be here today and talk to you. And with that, let's get started here. So we're going to start with a little video, and it's going to describe Motorola Solutions and our offer, or our solution called Digital Evidence Management, DEMS. So the way public safety communicates, public safety agencies communicate, that method of communication is changing. We're actually seeing more smartphone use on the rise. We're also seeing more cameras in cars and on clothing. And in fact, a recent survey by the Department of Homeland Security has shown that 94.5% of law enforcement agencies have either implemented or are fully committed to implementing body cameras. So empirical research shows that with the use of body cameras, the use of force incidents and citizen complaints decrease, and thereby building, public trust. Now, by 2019, it's estimated that there will be over 7 million data devices in use by public safety. And that basically joins with the existing install base of 20 million land mobile radios, the traditional two-way radios that cops use. And it creates then a need for lots of different applications. So COMMANDCENTRAL, in the video referred to it, is basically a suite of SaaS-based applications. It combines, it integrates multimedia and data so that the operational workflows go across the command center. And the focus is on collecting, organizing, analyzing, and utilizing intelligence so that the law enforcement agencies, officers are able to make more informed decisions in their operations and their tactical decision making. So digital evidence management, the solution really is an end-to-end solution. It consists of two main parts. One is what you see up top here. It's the video speaker microphones. It's usually sitting on the the side of the cop, and you saw that in the video. The other part is a SaaS-based application that is a content management-based application called Vault. Now, when an officer finishes his shift, he basically logs into Vault, and the evidence that's captured on his VSM or his video speaker microphone is then uploaded into Vault. It's reviewed, he manages it, and he can share it. And so when you look at the VSMs, there's two types of VSMs. There's the 300 series and the 500 series. This little compact device is capable of voice communications, video, still images, and it has an emergency alerting capability with the orange button there. Now, when you look closely, there's a little difference between the two of them. The 300 doesn't have any kind of a screen. The 500 series has a screen. So they really are kind of UI, UX constrained or challenged, right, these devices. We're going to just take a little step aside here and talk about chain of evidence or chain of custody. Now, when physical evidence is admitted into the court of law, it's required that it follows what they call the federal rules of evidence, Rule 901 in particular. And this means that there needs to be confidence that the evidence that's being admitted is both relevant and authentic to the items that were collected at the scene. So when you talk about relevant and authentic, I'll just try and put it in perspective for you. Imagine a gun casing that was collected, let's say Monday morning, right? That may not necessarily be relevant to a shooting that happens, on Tuesday, for example. And to give you an example of authentic, if I had a replica of a gun casing or a model of a gun casing, that's not the real casing. That's not going to be admissible in the court of law. It's not authentic to what was maybe collected at the scene. Okay, so what they're seeing is that electronic evidence, video evidence, basically follows the same rules as the physical evidence. So now let's put this together. You got these video speaker microphones. They're user interface constrained. And then you have this chain of evidence or chain of custody requirement, right? So how do you basically prove that you're satisfying that requirement? How do you prove that the device has been authenticated, that the video has some traceability to that authenticated device, and that it was the first responder that, captured that video on that device? So our method of doing this leverages identity and access management. And Bob will go into this more, but we're basically using OAuth access tokens to authorize REST APIs, and we're registering the device with 2 certificates. There's a client cert for device authentication, and then the video is digitally signed to prove that chain of evidence or chain of custody. And with that, I'd like to introduce Bob Horvath so that he goes through a technical deep dive.
So I brought one of these things with. So it looks kind of like a phone, right? It's got a little screen on it, a little touch screen, but like as Lynette said, that's just one model. The other model is just completely solid on the back. And all the video marketing videos had it with the screen facing out. It's always like this, because this is the audio button on the side, right, when they're talking, and that's really its primary purpose was to be an audio mic. And then on the side of it, there's another button that will turn the camera on. And now, if I turn the camera on, it's taking a picture of all you guys here, right? So that is kind of the device at its core. It's basically a primary function is that it's a microphone, but it also can take pictures when there's things going on. So the big challenge was how do you get that chain of evidence and some kind of a credential in the device so that we can trust the video that's taken off of it. And since they don't have any kind of a user interface on it, you can't have a guy logging in. And in general, there's a phrase of eyes up, hands off. A cop that's chasing somebody going 100 miles an hour can't log in before he starts taking his video, right? He's got to be ready to go. So the idea of putting certificates in the device was the way we get authentication credentials in there, and then to make the out-of-box experience, they call it, when the police guys open this thing up and register it easy. Came up with a solution that uses the camera on it to scan a QR code that kicks off a sequence that gets certificates into it. So the video here is kind of a screencast of that process as we go through it. Is there a reason why you're okay? So now we start off. we're logging into CommandCENTRAL, which is the SaaS app. Hopefully the video gods are working for us here. Okay, there's the cloud picture of Chicago, right? So this is kind of our IDP discovery or account chooser kind of thing. You give an email address. It once it's done there, it'll redirect us to wherever your IDP is. We're happen to hosting this guy, so he logs in there. And then he's in this Vault application, and this particular person's an administrator, so he's going to go in and set up a new radio. So he comes into the Vault application, goes to the device management section of it, and then goes over to register this device. Now, we've already done single sign-on, so he's already logged in. So then the next thing he does is he's going to figure out what kind of config parameters to use. And this is basic stuff like what the Wi-Fi, these things have Wi-Fi in them, and that's how we're going to get the certificates. So it has Wi-Fi credentials, and then that QR code basically tells it how to get on the Wi-Fi network and what it needs to do to create certificates. So there's the device scanning it. You'll see pretty quickly once I lined it up. So it's finding its Wi-Fi stuff, and then once it gets on the Wi-Fi network, there's URL on there that it pulls some information down. That gives it the information for to resume kind of the session that was started on this web page over here. So the sort of OAuth token session is sort of inherited by that device, and then he gets the information he needs that's relevant to his agency. So then the device creates certificate signing requests, sends them in. We get certificates that are signed, put back on the device, and stored away in a certificate authority, and then the admin goes back and can assign that device to a person for that day. And that part of assigning a device to a person kind of happens on a daily basis, but the registration part is just kind of the initial out-of-box experience. So that's basically the registration process. Looks like we're going to repeat here. So let me get back to. So that goes through kind of quickly. So I thought I'd kind of explain a little more detail what goes on. So in the first couple, this thing had a pointer on it, right? Does the laser work? All right. So the first part there is logging into the web page. So it's just basic, web login, the normal OAuth flow. He gets, his auth code, gets a access token for it, and initially we read off information based on what sort of certificate authority credentials that device is going to need to be associated with that agency. And then that all gets stored away in a session, and that QR code is enough for the device to go get on Wi-Fi and resume the sequence. So now after the admin points the device at the QR code, it comes into the that device registration app. We retrieve that session information, and then we can use that to sign the certificates that the device has sent up, store them away for later, and then give the signed certificates to the device. So in this short little sequence, we've gotten good certificates in the device. The private key never left the device, and we know who registered the device and what agency it belongs to. After that, the certificates on the device end up being his credentials to get OAuth tokens. So he'll come in to an authorization endpoint. That certificates get used to get an access token, and then that access token gets used to upload the video on an API that's designed for that video upload. The other certificate that he got during that process is used to sign the video for evidence purposes. So we know that it absolutely came from this device. So you have that chain of knowing which device it came to, who registered the device, because it's associated with the administrator that logged in originally and created that QR code. And you have that path all the way from the original guy that took the thing out of the box and pointed at a QR code all the way to the video being uploaded into the Vault storage and associated with the person that was assigned that device for the day. One thing in public safety world is they tend to share devices a lot. So this will be my device today and somebody else's device tomorrow. So that's why it's kind of more of a device thing than a user thing. that user part is, something we're working on too, so you can get both and you don't have to manually assign it. But in short, that was basically the idea of, how we're going to leverage, a combination of OAuth for kind of the API parts of it. The interaction with the certificates and the data store is all SCIM based. So it's not a typical SCIM use case, but we did leverage that technology and protocol to help move the certificates around and other parameters related to these flows. And then, of course, PKI just for authentication and signing purposes. So I combined those three technologies to solve the problem of getting a device, easily assigning it to somebody, to an agency, and getting that chain evidence set up so that you can take that video into court and have it be useful and not challenged. So, during this process, we had some challenges that, aren't really, some are unique to our environment, but a lot aren't. One of the problems we've struggled a little bit with is we are trying to make this, well, not trying to, we are making this a multi-agency thing. So, there are some big agencies that may have their own identity that, we'll be federating with, and there'll be smaller ones that we'll be hosting identities with. So we are, hosting identities and have a data store for passwords and that kind of stuff. So we've, had to deal with that world. It's kind of different than the typical public safety use cases. We're pretty much dealing with one agency now. It's kind of a multi-agency thing. The sort of discovery of the IDP, where his credentials are, was kind of a challenge. And in the beginning of that video, we just solved that kind of basically by associating a email address and domain with an IDP, which seems to be a fairly common approach. And then the third one is that application that assigned devices and kicked off the device registration thing and has the management of vault videos. And in the video, there's like that dashboard that had 9 or 16 kind of boxes on it. Those are each different sort of SaaS apps. So depending on what the guy's doing, he may upload a video, he may have some records from the day that he needs to store away for evidence purposes. There's other apps for tracking people. And there are all these different apps that are all kind of independent web apps, and single logout has been a challenge, which I think is common to a lot of sort of similar problems in the industry. But that's one of the nice things with this conference. We've seen some good ideas on how to improve that. But other than that, those are kind of our three biggest kind of challenges. And then, going forward, using certificates was certainly part of the, let's get away from passwords. Policemen and firemen and stuff generally aren't at a position where, I got to log in before I do my work. They're tending to be called out in an instant to do it. So we're looking at lots of ways to kind of make that frictionless, or eyes up, hands free is the phrase they use. And there's all sorts of other, sort of sensors and devices that are coming up. So, an example would be if this thing is, on here and you're not really having it turned on, but all of a sudden your heart rate elevates, or you pull your gun out of the holster, or there's a gunshot, or there's technology where they can, hear a gunshot, off the light microphones on light posts and, triangulate it. Then the network would be turning the camera on instead of the guy that's too busy to be turning, hitting the button himself. So that's kind of, it's kind of starting off with this, but there's a lot of potential with, all these different sort of sensors and devices, and making sure that everything that's happening with those is authenticated and authorized, and, that we can maintain a chain of evidence so that it can all be used in court. Because, it's not only the, need for the public to trust the police, but the police also have the problem that a lot of people challenge them and accuse them of things they haven't done, so that it's also useful for them to protect their own reputations. But that's kind of where we're going and where we're starting, and it's the whole use of kind of these identity protocols has made it a lot easier, and we're looking to use a lot more of it in the future. That's basically all we had. So I'll hand it over to Steve.
So thank you, Lynette and Bob for doing that. We'll answer some questions here in a minute. So a little bit about UnboundID for those that don't know who we are. We are a customer identity and preference or identity and management company. The company's been around for a little over 8 years, exclusively focused on customer-facing identity problems and challenges. So when we think about identity, we're thinking about in the context primarily of customers as opposed to employees, although we do workforce stuff as well, devices and applications. In our worldview, identity comes in those three flavors. You have human identity, device identity, and application identity. And we built a platform that today is powering a lot of brands around the world that are who in their respective verticals solving these at-scale identity problems. Now, of course, scale becomes very important if you're talking about an IoT. There's obviously a device proliferation issue, but scale's not the only IoT type thing. We took a look at this. I'm glad you left it up here. I'm going to put it in my pocket and take it home. So if you look at this device is a classic use case of a constrained identity application. Okay? In this case, there's no ability to do input-output beyond the camera and maybe some very basic button pushes. Okay? So the workflow that they showed of how I registered the device using the embedded camera, where I could go in as a peace officer, I could log in to the start of my day in the Panasonic Toughbook in my car, and then point to a QR code and have this now be assigned to me for that shift, and then assign other devices to it where this becomes a communication hub in a multi-device situation, is a classic case of identity in a constrained environment. You've got to figure out ways to map multiple devices to one or more human identities that each in themselves are connecting up to a bunch of applications. Right? So when you talk about identity and IoT, it's not just scale. A lot of people focus on scale. It's not just the scale aspect. Right? Particularly in industrial IoT or even constrained consumer IoT. You have different registration flows, different authentication flows, different ways of managing the relationship of these multiple devices, to a person. Another example outside of the public safety sector would be, just like a connected refrigerator or any consumer packaged product that I would go home. Most people have a smartphone. I've got one in my pocket right now, and I'm going to download an app, whether it's a Maytag, a Bosch, a GE, or you name it. And it would be a whole lot easier to register my new refrigerator by firing up the app, logging in, turning on the camera, and scanning a QR code on the inside of the door. It's a whole lot more easier, than me having a laptop, looking back and forth at the serial number, making sure I get it right to register these things. So as you're building, if you're in the device industry, as you're building this stuff, think about how do I streamline the efficiencies of very identity-centric things. I need to register the identity of the device. I need to associate that device with an account. I then need to do authentication and other type of application integrations. So when it comes to IoT, move beyond scale when you're thinking about what the primary challenge is. Just notice there's a privacy screen on here, so I really can't see the laptop. Oh, wait, there's a huge TV right there. Okay, another thing for identity people or you that are looking for identity solutions to help you get started in an IoT world is really take a hard look at the SDKs. Okay? Again, in an IoT-specific world, there are a set of APIs and protocols which become relevant. Whether you're in industrial IoT, those are going to be things for co-app and other constrained type things. Or in consumer IoT, it's a little bit more standard stack that you would expect to see because those are non-constrained devices. But APIs and SDKs help you get to market much more quickly. And this is one of the things that we're trying to do for UnboundID customers like Motorola, make it very easy. They already know what application they want to build. And they already know the challenges primarily that they need to solve. So how do we give them the SDK and the toolkits to help them address that problem very, very quickly and remove a level of complexity for them to do, right? Because innovation is what they're primarily focused on. They don't want to invent everything themselves. Centralized security in governments becomes incredibly important, not only in IoT use cases, but in just consumer identity use cases. Right? There's been a lot of talk at the show which I'm very happy to see, about customer identity management being separate and distinct from workforce identity management. Data is a big part of that. In customer identity land, the data is owned by the individual, not by the organization. Okay? That's particularly true in Europe and other parts of the world. It's becoming more relevant here in North America. And while there may be some debate who owns your Facebook data, you or Mark Zuckerberg, you both think you do. We certainly at UnboundID believe that you should have ultimate say over how that data is used. Right? And that is inherently a security and a data governance problem. So when you're looking for platforms to solve these customer-facing or IoT-specific use case, make sure the platform provides really fine-grained, very scalable, out-of-the-box, centralized security and governance model to do that. And we believe when you take this focus, right, and in particular, if you could find a way to add devices to your customers' experiences, whatever those may be, the value, the underlying business value of the identity will continue to increase. In this particular graphic, we see Sarah, right? So Sarah has got a customer profile that we may have built up over time. That profile only gets richer, my ability to interact with Sarah gets better, and I can give more contextually driven, compelling, delightful user experiences as I associate more of her devices. You know, back, I used to work at Netscape in the 90s. We got bought by AOL, and I considered them that wasn't a happy day for me, but AOL had a very simple message. It was, you know, we want to be a part of every person's experience at home, in the car, and at work. Right? They broke down all of human existence into one of those three buckets. Right? A person is at home, they're going to work, or they're at work. Right? So how do we make AOL as a platform relevant to all three of those, times for a human? Devices is really what is going to drive that today, is how do I engage with a customer across a variety of channels, a variety of devices to ultimately create more compelling user experiences. All right, so a little bit about our platform. We provide as much as we possibly can out of the box so you can get to the business of innovating and delivering to the marketplace really cool and compelling apps. If you want to see more about this or you want to see it in action, we've got a booth. It's kind of there in the center of the exhibitor hall. We'll be happy to sit down and show you what we've got, show you some demos, and explain things in more detail. All right. With that, though, let's get to the Q&A period, which is what we want. Are there questions for Lynette, Bob, myself, anybody? Yep, right here.
So how do you handle connected devices, especially in daisy chain or on-demand, in terms of registrations? Do you do one at a time, or is there a way to do it?
Yeah, so Bob and Lynette, you want to come up here in case a question comes to you? Is that just kind of from our experience, or how does Motorola doing it?
What is the best practice?
The best practice, okay.
Dealing with humongous numbers, quantity.
Yeah. So look, I'll let Motorola talk about how they're handling that. Okay. Did you guys hear? No, probably didn't hear the question. So the question is, what is the best practice for doing device registration? Right, knowing that there are lots of devices that a person may have. So am I really registering every single device one at a time serially, or can I streamline it somehow? Is that connected devices, right? Okay. So there are a couple different ways of doing that, right? One way, which I think this is going to be expanding into, and these guys will tell me if I'm wrong, is this becomes the hub for other devices. Okay? So as constrained as this is infinitely more powerful than some of the other devices. So Bob gave the example of a holster, right? If I have a holster that its only job is to Boolean true or false weapon present, right? That is a much more constrained device than this thing is. So this becomes the hub. Right? So at registration of this device in association with an officer, you could do a Bluetooth kind of scan, right? Show all the available devices, and the officer can then say which ones are associated with me, right? And then have this be the hub and the vehicle of registration or method of registration for all those connected devices to that. Very common in an industrial IoT constrained, right? There is this notion of a device gateway. Right. In fact, some of the folks at the UnboundID booth can show you an architecture that has device gateway. So using the device gateway as a method of registering very constrained devices is the best practice. In more of a consumer IoT, right, then currently they happen in one of three ways today. Right? If there's a method of input, so think about if you've ever registered a Roku box and you want to associate it with Amazon, the Roku box is going to say, go to amazon.com/register and type in this code. Right? That's an OAuth token flow that's done device by device by device. Scanning QR codes is getting much more prevalent also. But again, those are single devices that are not necessarily chained together. In a multi-device where they're all chained together, the use of a gateway is the best practice.
Yeah, so the idea of a hub is definitely key, and one of the things we find is it changes depending on what it is. So you're thinking this is the center of the universe. A lot of times this is talking to a radio that's here, that's the only connection back to the network, right? So then that guy's the center of the universe. A lot of the public safety people don't want to be on public networks, so these initial ones are Wi-Fi only. So that's why the video gets stored on here until they get back to the network, and then it gets uploaded. In the future, these will have LTE chips in them. It'll go automatically, or if the pods, the radio pods, may be the LTE sort of modem sitting on your hip, whereas this thing's talking Bluetooth to that or Wi-Fi to this, and then going over, or Wi-Fi in the car. There's all these different models, and it just kind of depends on what they have, what they trust, and what they're trying to do. This particular one doesn't have the little blue dot on it, but like there's a lot of our Bluetooth things, there's just a little blue dot on it. And if you touch the two things, it pairs, so it's not the typical problem of pairing pin or whatever. So kind of to answer your question, it really depends and it really changes, and that's part of the challenge is we have all these different use cases of different devices that all need to kind of collaborate with one another, and where that entry point into the network or back into their applications happens can change depending on the situation. So it's lots of different combinations and ways of doing that.
So I have another question, if you don't mind. We talk about IoT, but drones is coming into reality, and drones are actually known to have mesh network connections with multiple drones. How do you do registration and deregistration? Talk about software.
So the question was about drones and mesh drones. I know we do some work with drones. I haven't been working with it. I know we are associated with a company that has actually tethered drones that they actually are tied to the ground, so they have infinite power and really high bandwidth over this little tiny cable. But I don't know how the mesh stuff works. I know there's a lot of work on that for sort of self-organizing networks and meshes related to those. But most of the drone stuff we do is more the tethered drones and not the kind of army of drones or fleet of drones, at least that I'm exposed to. There may be others.
So we actually run into this at UnboundID in industrial IoT use cases, not drones. I'll give you an example. We're from Austin, Texas, and Austin, like most of Texas, has gotten a lot of rain. And so a typical use case for us would be, hey, I have a meshed network of water level sensors, water flow rate sensors that are connected to a system, including automatic floodgate servos to open and close floodgates based on downstream sensors. Okay? So the way those work is the initial registration creates a public-private key infrastructure. When I go to add the device to the ecosystem, right, or the environment, that's a manual registration process. Right. When the device comes online, it goes to a trusted discovery store, which in a lot of cases is an LDAP store, actually. It turns out to be very good at storing public-private keys and doing discovery. And so that way, when in this example, when a dam gets a signal from a upriver or upstream water flow rate or water level rate that says there's a surge of 10 foot of water coming your way, open floodgates 2 through 4, the first thing they do is they will go and do a discovery. What is the public key of the devices that are registered that I'm allowed to talk to, and has this message I've received been wrapped in one of those public keys, so I know with absolute certainty it's coming that way. So the answer to your question is not in a drone environment, that's outside my personal experience, but the administrator creates, everything has an embedded certificate that provides a basis of strong authentication, but also encrypted communication and identification of the device and the messages it's sending out, right? And then once those get connected to the network, either directly via LTE or over a radio or through a gateway, right, a discovery service becomes very important so that you could authenticate and validate that you are receiving messages from legitimate devices and that they are successfully or properly signed and encrypted with the right key that's a trusted key, so on and so forth. Other questions? Very back.
Yeah, I don't know. You're talking about LDAP, and they're using like GUIDs for voids and uniqueness and all that.
Yeah, so primarily it's REST protocols now, right? And not only is it REST protocols, but there are constrained HTTP light versions of REST protocols, right? Where the HTTP stack is in of itself is too bulky for some of these constrained devices. Okay, so having multiple, go back to the slide where I said APIs and SDKs, having multiple query languages, whether it's REST, LDAP, constrained HTTP, whatever it may be, becomes really, really important. The data model, the method that we've chosen in our product is that we support both defined and undefined data models. We don't care, right? You could use them both at the same time. You could use one, you could use the other, right? But that's becoming much, much more important, right? So you don't think of it as I have to sign off on using the full LDAP protocol. I have to sign up on using a hierarchical data model. I have to be schema. No, structured and unstructured data. In the IoT world, it typically fits into one of three types of data. You have structured data, which is the basic identity information, right? Every thing, person, or app has a profile with the most basic set of identification attributes and authentication methods, right? That most of the time is structured. Right, because it's well known and very well defined, and there are advantages if you it's structured. Right, then you have event data. Event data, so this did something, and this is the event timestamp, when, where, that kind of a thing, and then you have the artifact of what happened. Okay? So structured, semi-structured, or maybe structured, unstructured. Right? And so what we've been very purposeful in doing is building a data store technology that can handle any of those things with any protocol that you want on there. Right, so no, I'm not predicting a renaissance for LDAP and requirements of LDAP. In fact, I think you all
I can actually add a little bit to that. So, yeah, we do use their platform, and obviously well, maybe not so obviously, but certainly the human authentication part of it is an LDAP transaction. But all the rest of that stuff with the configuration parameters and certificates and all that was all done using SCIM, but not like the typical SCIM of enterprise to the cloud kind of human user thing. It's just their platform enables you to create an LDAP schema and just instantly convert that into a SCIM interface. So you're dealing with REST and JSON instead of LDAP and OIDs and stuff. And it can either be a pass-through where it's just straight from the LDAP schema to REST, or if you need to do some mapping or combining, they have ways to go either from the data store directly or multiple locations. You can pull information from a data store or from a SQL database or NoSQL database to kind of bring it all together into one interface. So it is really pretty slick and powerful to kind of combine all that stuff together.
Other questions?
So going back to the device enrollment phase, you have two certificates that are issued, and I'll ask a second about the subjects of the certs. And then later on, when you're doing the video upload, is when you introduce OAuth and using an access token. Can you describe what the distinctions are between those three? I understand one's MTLS, one's for signing, and I guess what puzzles me is why you needed the OAuth token at the end.
So there's two places where the OAuth came into play. So when the admin's logged in and registering the device, that's all kind of OAuth driven. There's access tokens for that. The device part of it, we kind of needed certificates on there for the video signing just for evidence purposes, and because it's a device that doesn't have an interface for username and passwords or any other kind of way to get input in it, we end up using a certificate on the device to authenticate the device. So when it's coming in to get an access token, it comes into an authorization endpoint, gives a certificate as its credentials, and gets a token back. And we could have probably sent certificates end to end for that case, but all those other applications are all OAuth based, and there's API gateways and stuff that are expecting to see OAuth tokens to know whether to let it through or not. So it just kind of made those applications consume, their APIs they don't know that it was a certificate that authenticated the device. It's just got a token.
Other questions?
So I think you talk about the soft delete features when the device is inactive. Can you elaborate a little more? Like a timestamp or
And what's that? Yeah, I don't remember what the soft deletes, but was that on the slide at the end there? Is it? Oh, onboarding. Yeah. So Yeah, there may be cases where an officer goes on vacation or is suspended or something where you don't want to get rid of the credentials. You just want to soft delete them so that if it comes back, you don't lose all that information. And with these devices in particular, it was kind of if someone thinks they've lost the device, is it really lost or not? So you don't want it to be used in case it is lost. But one of the things with these devices too is you don't want an officer to be able to go in there and reset the thing or put different certs on or whatever. So basically, once that thing's set up, it's impossible to change it. So if the guy loses it, being able to soft delete it just in case it really was lost is important. But if it just happened to be in the seat of his car or something, we don't lose that and have to effectively, completely reset that device.
So have you thought about like a stateful credential and the multi-state depends on the state.
Yeah, so the question was if we thought about a stateful credential. So I think so, but I'm going to make sure I understand what you're saying, and I'll very quickly add. So soft delete is actually the name of a feature in the UnboundID platform. So I don't know if that was on one of your slides. So, look, one of the common use cases for soft delete is the following. Let's say you are Netflix and you've got a zillion people that have signed up, and then someone goes away. When they come back, you don't want them to have to re-register, and you want to guarantee global uniqueness of usernames, so you don't want a username reused now with a different person. So in our platform, we call that a soft delete. It's the ability to make an account inactive and make it invisible, so that when applications query the data store, that user doesn't exist, but the user actually does exist. And so there are extended operation controls that you could say, hey, if a user has gone to inactive or soft delete, how do I very quickly resurrect them without having to go through a full registration flow again? Right? We do this to bring people back from the churn death. Right? That's what that is. The notion of stateful authentication, absolutely, right? This is used in multi-factor authentication, adaptive authentication, and others. So we're very interested in several inputs of a state. Is it a recognized device? Is it within a window of time frame of use? Is it in a geography that is well known and understood? What's the last time person presented a strong set of credentials or a step-up authentication? So yes, stateful authentication is very important in our platform, because to both widen and narrow functionality that people can do in apps. For instance, if this camera, if the officer has not authenticated, maybe they're doing double shift, right? You may want to say, look, the authentication on these devices is good for single shift, and therefore we're going to force you to re-authenticate to make sure it's still active, right? That way you would prevent somebody from just handing over an active or a live device, which is assigned to a different officer, and that gets into all sorts of problems. So stateful authentication is a very important consideration of feature set. Anything you want to add? Okay.
No.
All right, we're running out of time. Is there one last question? Anything? All right, so thank you very much, Lynette and Bob. Appreciate it, and good luck with the application. Yep. We'll look forward to getting pulled over and seeing that flashing light.